Production, definitely. We can do that. We can do that in urban spaces. We've done that in urban spaces for millennia. I think is another thing that we have to really be thoughtful about too. Nothing is new in terms of urban agriculture. People have been growing food in cities since the beginning of time, since the beginning of cities anyway. And this is not a new trendy thing that we're trying out here. This is how poor people the world over have been feeding themselves and increasing their food security for since ancient times.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label that distinguishes soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock. You just heard from Onika Abraham, who has so much more to share with us about the history of urban farming, not only for food production, but also as a mainstay tool for community justice. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to thank you for subscribing to our podcast and ask you to visit our website, realorganicproject.org, to become one of our 1,000 Real fans. Our movement is small but powerful, and if you're interested in keeping real food on your table and in your local stores, we'd love to have your help and support. Now let's get back to the conversation between myself and the Executive Director of Farm School NYC, Onika Abraham. Thank you, Onika Abraham, for your time today and for being here. Onika and I met a little over a year ago. It was at the Real Organic Project Symposium at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And you gave a speech.
It's been that long already. It doesn't feel like that long.
The one this year got canceled, so that's why we're here. And but your speech there, I've listened to it a couple times actually, and I've listened to your speech at Keep the Soil Organic rally in New York. And I just want you to know I think the world of you. I think you're an amazing voice. You speak with such eloquence and clarity on really important issues. And one of the lasting messages that I have from the talk that you gave was about the importance of sharing our stories. So I'd love to hear today about all the stories that are important to you and maybe how you ended up becoming the executive director of Farm School NYC.
Yes, so blessed. Blessed to be that. Sure, I'd love to share a story, my story. I feel like I need a little bit more of a prompt though. Like, how far back are we going?
Well, that's up to you. Maybe a great place to start would be when you first had the inkling that you might want to farm.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I was brought up by two parents here in New York City. I was born and raised in a high-rise building, big concrete, surrounded by concrete, and just very much a city girl. But both my parents were brought up on farms. My mom was brought up in Alabama, in rural Alabama, and my father was brought up in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So both of them were rural children for the most part. And I was blessed enough to be able to go and visit my grandparents on their farms when I was growing up. So I always, from an early age, just had this attachment and this excitement around people who were growing food. And in particular, my maternal grandmother was just a fascination to me. I mean, I didn't get to know her until she was in her 80s. And at that point, she was still farming. She had what looked to me as a New York Manhattanite, it looked like a huge kitchen garden. And it still is huge by urban standpoints. It was about probably a little less than an acre. And she grew every single thing that her children ate. Including like corn for grounding, to making cornmeal out of, all the poultry, all the eggs, basically everything except for wheat, which they didn't grow in Alabama at that time. My grandfather was doing all of the row crops. He's the one who had the tractor, and actually, according to my mother, the oxen and the mule. And she was brought up in the 40s, so it was a very different standard in terms of how he was doing that kind of production level farming. But he grew soy towards the latter part of his life and cotton. But my grandmother fed everybody. And I remember when I was very young, she brought in this box, a cardboard box full of little chicks. that they'd just been laid, and she brought them into her bedroom for the night to just kind of keep them warm. And as a little kid, I was like, oh my God, look at these adorable things. And I think at that time, I really did fall in love with the idea of farming, from the level of farming that my grandmother did. And I think what the beauty of it for me was, and I don't think I could have articulated it at the time, but there was so much self-sufficiency in that. Like the security of being able to know that you can feed your whole family without a penny in your pocket, no matter what happened in terms of like, are we going to get the loan for the USDA, to get this tractor or whatever, regardless of what was happening with my grandfather's farming business. My grandmother knew that she could feed her entire family, and half the community as well, through bartering and exchange and kind of working together with mutual aid. So, I always, that was landed in my heart as a child, and I will never forget that. And I aspired to that in some ways, but I don't think I really saw it as a career path until much later in life.
It's so relevant right now with COVID, when sometimes the store shelves were empty. And, my family's like, what are we going to do if people start raiding the farm? We kind of joke about that. But I think for the first time this year, people are realizing how fragile our food system is. Have things changed at Farm School NYC?
Yes, a lot has changed at Farm School NYC.
Well, first tell us about it.
What the hell is that thing? So Farm School NYC is an education program for folks that want to learn about sustainable agriculture through the lens and with the intention of making a real positive impact locally, and maybe beyond that, around food justice and food sovereignty. So the folks that we're dealing with are looking at food and farming as a means to really bringing equity and health and wellness into their communities, and wealth. So anyone over the age 18 can apply to Farm School. We wish that we could accept everyone that applied, but we don't have the capacity. So we accept a cohort of about between 20 and 30 people every year, and they go through 2 years worth of programming. So we have classes that we run, and everything from the foundations around the food system and the systemic racism and the systemic issues that are creating the inequities in our communities around food and health and wealth. That's kind of the underpinning, the foundation for the courses that we offer. And then on top of that, we layer in information around popular education in the hopes and with the intentions that people coming into Farm School are going to be going out into their communities and spreading this knowledge. And then all of the regular skills you would imagine that an urban farmer or a rural farmer might need. So there's a botany course and an irrigation course and a crop management course is going on right now. We also have an animal husbandry course that's happening right now. So the biggest difference is that, you can tell by what I'm wearing that it's like 90 degrees here in New York right now. It's quite hot. It is definitely the height of the growing season, and our students are not out on farms and gardens where they typically will be doing their coursework. So about, I would say, 65 to 70% of our programming happens on farm, hands-on, with an instructor who is also a farmer, really doing hands-on skills. And then the other 30%-ish would be done in a classroom setting. All of our courses happen at night, or during the day, on the weekends, when people who are working jobs other than agriculture, can attend. So the biggest difference is that because of the restrictions around gathering in larger groups, we haven't been able to get out into the farms and gardens with a whole cohort of classes as we usually would, and we're doing a lot more of this, as we all are. Like, we're doing a lot more Zoom. There's a lot of gatherings around that. So that is the biggest, just surface programmatic, difference that you would find is we're all on Zoom, and we're doing our best that we can around that. But one of the most important aspects of Farm School is in really channeling and doing honor to our mission around addressing the systemic issues that are undergird and create inequities in our food system. That means that we center, in particular, Black and Brown folks, low-income folks, people, who have been more disproportionately marginalized as in regards to maybe their sexual orientation or gender identity. So we center those folks in our programming with the knowledge that the people who are most impacted negatively by the systemic inequities in our food system and in our system in general are the closest to the solutions, they've experienced the problems the most, they really know the inner workings of those problems, and they are best equipped with support often, and that's what Farm School believes that we provide, to develop solutions to those issues and to those problems.
Yeah, there's so many things that you touched on there. I want to maybe start with the focus on health and gardening and farming. What do you teach your students there about those connections?
Oh, the connections between health and gardening in particular?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's so much more than just the food we eat. It's like that emotional feeling of hard work in the garden and, being able to taste what a real strawberry actually tastes like again. So there's that joy too, that brings you health. And I feel like we need to be, especially through COVID, so aware of the isolation that's bringing to us, and how can we figure out ways to find that health? And many people are starting their own gardens right now in their backyard as a way to connect to the earth instead of to each other. And anyway, what does health and farming and urban farming mean to you?
Well, to address your question around like what we teach our students around kind of health and wellness and farming. It's funny, this gets to kind of what the core of Farm School is about. And they teach us so many things. They teach each other so many things. And that's really one of the foundational tenets of Farm School is this sense of, and I mentioned in passing, like popular education, and what I meant by that in that shorthand is the sense that there's a whole history behind this methodology of education, and it comes out of labor organizing in South America and farm workers' rights and things of that nature. The core idea from it, at least the value that we've really held up and gleaned out of it, is this idea of one, everyone's an expert of their own experience, right? And so when you're creating space for learning, to dismantle that hierarchical expert kind of culture, which is, in so many ways grounded in like white supremacist kind of like dogma around like, I know best, who knows best? This one person knows best, and this one person or one class of people has dominion over all knowledge in this,
right.
in this world, or all knowledge that we want to, honor and respect. And dismantling that and saying, no, that's actually not true, right? We all have lived experience. We all have knowledge to share. And especially when it comes to something as intimate as bodily health and food, things that are so universal to just what it is to be alive. We all have some lived experience and knowledge of that. And our role at Farm School is to create the space for that to be exchanged and shared and lifted up and celebrated, especially given who we center. Many of the groups that we center have been really ill-served by traditional education, right? In so many ways. That whole idea of classroom setting is really to some folks is intimidating, off-putting, dehumanizing. How do we get away from that, and so that we're not talking about this kind of very hierarchical approach, and we're really talking about this person next to you knows so much. Let's find out what they know, and how do we all build upon the knowledge that we have together. So that is a long way of saying, we don't teach them anything. We set up an environment and a space for us all to learn together.
It's about community.
And that doesn't mean that some people have lots of like awesome scientific knowledge. Maybe it's Western knowledge, maybe it's Eastern, maybe it's Indigenous. There's so many different ways of knowing that we want to like celebrate and bring in, and so there's no exclusivity over what we're valuing, what we're bringing. So that feels really important to bring into the space, especially around farming, because you ask anybody who has like a degree, some kind of degree in agriculture, like, you know, that's been farming for some time, what they learned. And often what they'll say is like, going to school taught me how much I didn't know. And then I went and I farmed and I started to learn. Like I learned from the land. I learned from doing, right?
Experience, for sure.
I learned from other farmers. I'm still learning. This is my 10th cycle. And like, you know, this is a lifestyle. It's life's work, growing food and getting into that right relationship with land so that you can listen deeply enough to learn, to get something out of it. So I really look at what we offer at Farm School as a primer and all of that. You know, so much of what we want to do is like to prime people for how to sit still and listen, you know, how to be on land so that you can learn from it. The humbleness that comes with that. And then infusing them also with this deep, hopefully, this deep faith in themselves in terms of their own sense of knowing, you know, so that that they feel confident going out and saying, you know, this is what I know, and I want to share this, you know. I think both of those things need to be held, at least in people who I admired most and learned from most. I think those two things were held in concert, you know, a sense of like real humility to be able to listen and keep learning and knowing that there's more to learn, and the sense of I can step into this space, you know, I have things to share and to say, and that generosity of spirit to get it out there.
Yeah. I have no idea what it looks like to convert an empty lot into a garden and that transformation that must take place. I mean, can you describe that for someone who's never, and the work involved, you know, and everything that has to happen to have that happen, how long it takes to bring health back to, you know, soil that's been compacted and dead?
Right. Oh boy. There's so many people who've lived this story over and over in my own history and in the history of my city. I myself have never done this alchemy. I have participated in that, and I've only ever seen it done in community anyway. I've never seen one person do a lot from scratch. I would love to hear that story, but that's not the story I've ever really experienced. I've always heard and seen this done in community. And there's so many hurdles to it, you know. I think about one of the people who I never got to meet in their lifetime, but Hattie Carthen, who was an incredible advocate here in Brooklyn, where I live now, in Bed-Stuy, for urban agriculture, urban open space, environmental justice, way before her time in the 60s. Planted trees, magnolia trees throughout our neighborhood, and was really critical into bringing gardens, inspiring gardens, and bringing Hattie Carthen Community Garden into being, community farm. And that was a vision that she and her neighbors had, and really worked in community to make that come to fruition. So in urban spaces, one of the biggest issues is access to land just in general. So unfortunately, there are many, many spaces that are vacant in New York City. There are spaces back in Hattie Carthen's days. There were places that were abandoned by landlords, by city agencies, and these plots of land were just not underutilized, and also health hazard. I mean, there were a lot of things that were halfway burned down houses, and lots of dumping happening, industrial and chemical dumping, as well as just objects and glass and things like that. And it was a real detriment to the community. And certain communities, in particular, low income communities of color, had disproportionately had these kinds of spaces. So communities got together, They hopped fences, they cut chains, they freed the land to get in there and to start to clean it up and to just recover it. Often without anybody's permission, without anyone's, say so. And that was by necessity, because they'd often lobbied, advocated, written letters, called, 911, all of these types of things to try to get some agency to just clean up the space, and weren't getting any movement on it. So why not? Why not step into that space and do what needed to be done to reclaim it? So that happened all over New York City, especially in the 70s and early 80s. Where folks were just, depending on it didn't matter the size of the space, but were just going in and doing what needed to be done to just make it so it wasn't a health hazard. And then looking at the potential of what it could be, So many of the communities where that was happening were communities that were heavily immigrant influenced. So in particular, in my lived experiences around the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where I'm from, Lower East Side is calling us out. So the Lower East Side of Manhattan was kind of ground zero for a lot of the community garden movement in the 70s. And so many folks, especially from West Indian heritage, so folks from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic, in particular, folks who, through the Great Migration, so Black folks who were coming up from down south. My mom was a big part, both of my parents were parts of those migrations. So right around that time, my mom was coming up from Alabama. She, needed a job, and the apartheid that was happening down there at the time, that horrible caste system that was happening in the South at the time, really, even with her college, education, did not have a lot of opportunities for her. So she came to New York. Masses of people were doing that through the 40s, 50s, 60s, who had grown up on farms, who knew how to farm, didn't have the space, right? So as they're cleaning out as they're reclaiming these spaces, as they're just making them not a health hazard, they're also seeing the potential for growing. And that's how these gardens started to come to fruition. So people started growing on them. And then suddenly, after some years of people growing and creating these beautiful spaces, and folks having like bambas and like building casitas on the land and things like that, often without anybody's permission, slowly the city started to pay attention. They started seeing that there weren't as many violations happening, there weren't as many health hazards happening. They're wondering how they could either co-opt this movement, I would say, or figure out some way to bring it into regulation, but started to really develop different programs to give some licensing, to give some permitting to those gardens that had already, really been liberated and done from scratch with very little no funding at all, other than crowdfunding by communities. So now what we're looking at in New York City is we have upwards of 600, 700 community gardens in all of the boroughs of New York City. Many are under the auspices of the Parks Department here, and they have licenses that allow them to grow food and community within that space. There are still significant boundaries, troubles, barriers within that system that we're also working to dismantle. As a farmer, one of those things has to do with allowing people who are farming on community land and providing totally uncompensated ecosystem services to the city, right? Wastewater management, soil remediation, so many things that we're offering in those spaces that no one's getting paid to do, but we are all benefiting from. But a lot of the licensing agreements that people have with publicly held land don't allow for farmers to make a profit off of what they're growing there.
What?
I know, look at your face.
That's insane.
That doesn't make any sense.
No. I just assumed a community garden could have a farm stand.
They can have a farm stand, but
They
they
have to
can't
give
make
the
a
food
profit
away?
on it. They can't make a profit on it like you would out of a like off of your farm, right? Like your family farm. That's not allowed under the current laws and current regulation, the current licensing in New York City. There are a lot of stipulations around that. You can have a farm stand, but you can't really, like I said, build value-added businesses that like pay living wages and actually kind of go to individual people. You can bring that money back into building out that particular community garden, but basically what it does is it prohibits people from making a living wage and making a living as an urban farmer if they're doing so at a community garden that has kind of park space.
Is this something
there's a lot of limitations around it. There's some workarounds, but it's very discouraging. And what we need is to encourage people to go into this line of work and to encourage like innovative thinking so that we're not only building health in our communities, but we need to build wealth in our communities. And the last thing we need is to have restrictions on how people can do that.
I'm just really blown away by this because there are all these places that are maybe more rural that have this community land and you can rent spots very similar to maybe what a community garden was. And somehow you can have a business on those community open spaces, but not in an urban situation.
Well, I can only speak for New York City, so I don't know what the
that just seems like we need to work on that one.
Are in other places. But that's certainly the case here.
Yeah.
And I know of organizations, nonprofits that are working within the system and are finding workarounds that can kind of make some sense. Operating within a nonprofit structure helps with that because officially you're not making a profit anyway, right? But for cooperatives, for other business types, other enterprise types that I feel shift power and build equity within the food system so that we're not kind of constantly hand out with philanthropic dollars. Like that's also not the best way to build equity. I mean, it is a way, but I want to be able to support other ways. So if you're talking about an LLC or a cooperative or other types of enterprise structures, there are really big limitations on what they can do in terms of earning income off of public land, off of the commons, as we would call it. But I would argue, not very eloquently, but I would argue that we really need to look at the commons as a way to step up and to counter the inequities that are already existing in our society. And so if we're limiting the ways, let's be honest. When we're talking about real estate in New York City and in most cities, it is virtually impossible to be able to pay a market rate for land so you can privately hold land in the city and farm on it. That's not going to happen.
Like everywhere.
Whoever has access to do that.
Anywhere close to markets, you have a problem.
Anyone who has access to do that, right? There's probably an equity situation there, right there, embedded in that, right? They obviously have some privileged aspect to be able to do that. So it's automatically, countering what we're trying to do when we're talking about low income, Black and brown folks being able to do this work. So if the only option, which kind of legally is the case now, is to have privately held land, that you basically buy at market rate or you try to find someone who can afford, it totally leaves everyone out. So if we're not using the commons, that means we're leaving out the most marginalized people. That's a problem. And so I think that there are, legislators within New York who are sensitive and understanding of this particular predicament and want to make some movement around it. And now is the time, is what I'm here to say. I mean, I'm hoping that we can make some movement on this soon. We have people graduating every year from farm school who have dynamite, innovative, really interesting ideas that they want to do in urban spaces, in rural spaces, in peri-urban spaces. And I don't want them leaving the city to have to, to try to pursue them.
Yeah. And one of my personal little battles locally is that the Open Space Conservancy and actually the local government doesn't recognize a farm unless it's greater than 15 acres. And I'm making a living on 3, and I know people that make a living on 1. It's crazy. So I talk about how productive you can be on such a small area and how.
That's so insane. I mean, more than half of the farms in New York State, I'm not talking about New York City, New York State would not be eligible. based on that. We have tiny farm. Well, this is the East Coast, but we have tiny farms here. So yes, how productive can you be in a small space? Very. I will answer the question directly first, and then remind me to get back to just kind of addressing the question in a general sense of why I think that particular lens is not the only one to look at. But yeah, I mean, we can be incredibly productive on a small piece of land. I think when we're talking about agroecology and some of the indigenous ways that people have been growing in food forests and other intensive growing methodologies and ways in past, and the ways that we've done even more evolution around that, especially in urban spaces in modern day. It can be really, really impressive, the amount that we can do. And that's not even taking into account, hydroponics and all of these other kind of newer ways of growing. This is just growing in soil. The things that we're doing around vertical gardening in urban areas is really dynamite, and that's really maximizing the space that we have. And I think that, we're blessed to have a climate that lets us grow for much of the year. We're really doing a lot around season extension, and all of these kind of tenets of agroecology, tenets of what we call organic agriculture. Those are intensifying the ways that we can produce more food for more people, and a greater diversity of food and more nutrient-rich food within smaller spaces. And obviously that's critical as we're talking about climate change, when we're thinking about the incredible impact that agriculture has on climate change in this world. We really need to think about how we're maximizing the places that we're growing on, and there are so many ways of doing so. Just looking back at those indigenous roots and what we've been kind of building upon over time. So production. Definitely, we can do that. We can do that in urban spaces. We've done that in urban spaces for millennia. I think is another thing that we have to really be thoughtful about too. Nothing is new in terms of urban agriculture. People have been growing food in cities since the beginning of time, since the beginning of cities anyway. And this is not a new trendy thing that we're trying out here. This is how poor people the world over have been feeding themselves and increasing their food security since ancient times. And I would also say around production, and it's production is so important. I'm not trying to say it's not, but I am wary of the question only in that if that's the only criteria that we're judging agriculture by, we're going to be led down a very dark path. There are so many damaging things that have been done in the name of production, in the name of volume, in the name of scale around agriculture. In modern days and historically, I would say that the whole reason my people are in this country has to do with this very skewed idea of what progress looks like, what production looks like, what, that whole kind of framework is very problematic, or can be. There's nothing wrong with trying to maximize what you have, but not at the detriment of everything else. So I think that's how industrial agriculture kind of that sprung into being, and the monocropping and the kind of the more destructive elements of commercialized agriculture grew out of that drive for production. So there's so much else, right? We all celebrate it. Everyone who's in this movement celebrate those things. So what is the actual nutrient makeup of the food that we're growing? Like, that matters, right? That matters, and as much as production, as much as volume. What are the ecosystem services that we're doing through our farming, through our land stewardship? That matters just as much as it does how much we're growing. And the efficiency and the ways that we're using water, all of that matters. So when I see grants that are like, talking about just measuring how much produce we're putting out on our farms, I'm like, okay. And there are other environmental services. There are so many other community services that are being done around education, around wealth building, around, kind of just building sovereignty, that we need to also use as metrics. So I know you know that, but I wanted to just
no, it's good.
Put that in.
especially even like subsidies per acre. It's like, I'm sorry, but the $20 per acre subsidy isn't helping me over here on 3 acres. There's so many injustices the way everything is set up. I'm curious why you support the Real Organic Project. When you speak, there's so many similarities. And so I'm actually really drawn to, I'll just explain the story, what happened. So we were told at the National Organic Standards Board that the reason why hydroponics had to be an organic is because of urban agriculture. And, we really want to include urban agriculture in the organic movement. And because of that, you should really kind of rethink the way you're defining organic. And I'm just curious, out of those, you said how many hundred gardens that, community gardens, how many of them are hydroponic?
Oh, none of them. I mean, that's not okay, let me back up and be careful. I have no bone to pick generally with hydroponics at all.
Right.
I believe we need so many different solutions. Our food system is so jacked. Like we need more allies and more solutions. And if they are, if they're thinking about environmental justice, if they're thinking about systemic racism, if they're thinking about some of the other issues around inequities that are rife within our food system, then we're on the same team.
I agree.
So it's not hydroponic in and of itself that I have any issue with. And hydroponics and aquaponics are also ancient growing mediums. These are not new technologies either. That's the other thing. These are indigenous folks, have been practicing those on almost every continent for millennia, once again. So this is nothing new. The ways that we're doing it now, some people do it in different ways. Some of those ways, have more issues around, chemical inputs or whatever, but there's so many ways to do it, the wonderful ways to do it. I think it's fine. I don't know any community garden that's doing hydroponics, current on any massive scale. Let's say the majority of community gardens are growing in soil. The majority of urban farms in New York currently are growing in soil. That is just, first of all, it's the most accessible way to do this at this point. There's much lower startup costs around that. So it's usually how people come into this work. So that's pretty clear. Now, if we're talking about, okay, who made this comment? Let me just back up here again. Was that the USDA you said?
It was made several times at the National Organic Standards Board where this issue was coming up. And, of course, there are all these farmers there saying, soil is the way we grow our fertility, and this is the definition of organic farming. And as long as you label it hydroponic, we don't have any problem with it, but it's not an organic way of farming.
Exactly.
And so, and what was told back to us is that we want to be able to be inclusive of urban farms. Okay. And the reality was this was Wholesome Harvest and Driscoll's, these massive industrial corporations that were redefining organic and saying it's the small urban farms that we want to make sure we include here.
Thank you. Right, because that's not my experience of what urban farms look like in New York City, the majority of them, the vast majority of them. And the issue is that the hydroponic farms that do exist, and I don't, I'm not as clear about who is certified organic or not in New York City, but I will say that they tend to be more well-resourced, right? Because I said it tends to be a more capital-intensive startup cost to do something like this. So usually there's some kind of venture capital or some kinds of additional capital that's put into that. And that means they might have the bandwidth to do more lobbying. They might have the bandwidth to do more, to have a louder voice in this. And then when it comes back to my comments around production and volume and like what metrics we're using, those metrics, if you look at some of these organizations, these companies, they'll talk a lot about volume, right? Because that is what is convincing to people who are very interested in volume and scalability, and oftentimes our government is also really interested in that. So I think those things kind of get skewed. So it ends up seeming like the dominant, voice of urban agriculture ends up, being these kind of hydroponic or kind of organizations, and it has more to do with their access to power and the access to resources to speak and be heard at those levels. So I don't know how many actual community gardeners were at that meeting, but probably not that many, and urban farmers. And I think, again, like my issue with this, I think why I appreciate the Real Organic Project has to do with the sense of, it's not that hydroponic is a bad thing at all. It is a thing, and I think that we need it. As an urban, I think it's important. I think it's an important part of this mix. I don't want it outlawed. But as a consumer, I want to know the difference. I want to know what I'm eating. Like, I don't think that that's a difficult argument to make. And so that's how I'm looking at this. It's an issue around labeling. And I don't think that there's any detriment to that, in terms of hydroponics. So I'm willing to be in conversation around that with folks who feel differently. I really am, because I want to learn. There might be aspects of this that I don't quite understand, but to me, from a consumer standpoint, I don't see anything wrong with knowing. I want more information, not less. And I don't see how that will necessarily mean that there's less urban agriculture. In general, I know that it will not be, and less hydroponic urban agriculture. I don't see why that would be limiting in any way. And there's also the positive aspect of it, which is like, I'm a soil nerd like so many others, right? Like, right. I grow in soil. I love soil. I feel like my body is made up, of soil, which it is. I look at it as, kind of like an ancestor, a soil is old. It is to be cherished. It takes so long to create a layer of topsoil. I am not the scientist. When you interview them, you ask them that question, because it really takes hundreds of years to make one layer of our growing soil. So think about what that soil has experienced, right? And honor that. I really do look at it as my ancestor. And this is something I learned from one of our teachers at farm school, happy to give her a shout out. A beautiful farmer, so whip smart, Lori Clevenger from Rising Root Farm was talking. She teaches irrigation for us, and she was talking about how water is an ancestor for her. And I was like, yes, it is, right? Water even more so, because water recycles itself in a much quicker cycle than soil can or ever will. And it really is like what we have is what we've always had on this planet. Like, we're not making any new water. It's the same stuff that the dinosaurs were bathing in now. So I love thinking about that in terms of the respect and the reverence we need to give to what we are made up of and what we are dependent on to live. Air, water, light, earth. So I love the Real Organic Project in that it celebrates this ancestor of ours, this soil, and looks to protect it and honor it and lift it up, and knows that it takes work, like stewardship, to keep it fruitful, and it's so easy to deplete it, so easy. Within 2-3 years, it can be gone like that with the wrong kinds of practices, agriculturally speaking. So, yeah, it's critical.
Soil is so much a part of it, and it's also really the story of the corporate takeover of the organic label. And it was started by those small family farms. I remember Elliot Coleman once told me, if you just have some seeds and a shovel, you're on your way to sustainable farming. And, it can be really simple. And so many of those hydroponic facilities just have so much money behind them. So there really was a huge lobbying force there. And so, it's about kind of not being able to get my farm products into the marketplace anymore. Some of that is because of the hydroponic influence, but some of it is because it's just the systems now that the grocery stores are using to create shelf space don't include me. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about certified organic and how that's excluding many small farmers and where it's failed people. What instances doesn't it work for people? And, do we need a new word? What can we do about where it's failed people and how it's failed people?
So I'm going to have to speak more from a consumer standpoint on this than anything else. I am a crazy plant lady and definitely a gardener. I have more tomatoes than I know what to do with right now, but I am not a farmer that goes to market at all. So I'm not working within those spheres. And for the most part, farm school is dealing with very newbie farmers, just beginning farmers. But I do, definitely am in relationship with farmers who teach our classes, who are operating in the same landscape that you are. Many of our students go on to farm commercially and are in that space as well. And I also have, professionally worked on boards and things like that really are digging into these issues. So I do know somewhat. And I will say, from a consumer standpoint, I really feel like the label has been problematic because of exactly what you've said. It is a marketing tool, and it's not as interested in the original ethos around organic agriculture and agroecology, which I've used a couple of times, which, I haven't really unpacked the word and how I use it. But for me, agroecology kind of frames what my understanding of some of the original impetus around the organic movement was, which was definitely, no doubt grounded in growing in soil, growing without pesticides, without chemicals, with using, really valuing. That's the heart of organic agriculture is the soil and how you feed the soil, not the plant, right? That ways of growing, which are so, based in so many ways and honor our indigenous roots around agriculture and really have brought those to the fore in that way. So again, so much of what our ancestors were doing, rethinking that around agriculture, and that's kind of what gave birth to the organic movement. And for me, part and parcel of those tenets around protecting the land and protecting the earth and protecting the water and runoff and things like that also had to do with protecting the people. I think that what agroecology brings back into the what I think the organic movement has lost sight of as it became more a label than a movement is the sense of just thinking holistically about our world and not just thinking about the planet, but also the people, right? So the whole social justice aspects of things, the whole labor rights, farmer rights, the right to a living wage, all of those things are missing from the organic label altogether. USDA label has nothing to do with any of that. And that's not, I believe that was part of the intention, because the original idea behind this movement, in my understanding, and what agroecology still clings on to, was holistic thinking about how we're living on this planet, in community with other organisms, including humans, including other humans, right? So the ways we treat people on the planet are key. How do we honor those relationships? That was the original impetus behind it. When the organic movement kind of came through, this is before my time, but when it came through being more systematized on a national level, that's my understanding of when we started to pick away at parts of it, right? To compromise, to make it acceptable and palatable to people all over the country and to large agricultural producers, because all that consolidation was starting to happen around that time, right? So how do we build a big enough tent to keep, industrial and commercial agriculture in this tent? And then we lost so much in that process. And so that's what I feel is missing around certification. I still appreciate it. I know that people are doing incredible work around really ensuring that the standards are up to point. It depends on the certifier to some extent, and where you are in the United States, which is unfortunate. But some certifiers do a really great job in going out to farms and really making sure that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's around all of the actual regulations that are there around chemical fertilizers and, crop rotations, all the things that are necessary, line by line, to be a certified organic producer. But that spirit has been lost from that label. The spirit around the real protecting of the planet, not just how much can I get away with and still be within regulations, right?
Right.
But the real intentionality around it is not policed, as part of that label as consistently as I would like. And that's part of the problem, right? So I think, that issue, the social justice issue is a big part of it for me. Not every label, I think that there are really interesting types of labeling coming up that are trying to address that around labor issues. And oh man, I'm not going to remember. You have to cut this part out because I don't remember the name of it. What is A something certified justice?
Oh, the Agricultural Justice Project, AJP? Yeah.
So there are movements, there are, some developments that people are working in coalition to try to bring some of that ethos back, especially around labor issues, like with the Agricultural Justice Project. But it's not consistently being thought of at all in the USDA label. So it isn't giving me as a consumer all that I would like to know in terms of what I'm buying. There is some level of uncertainty there around things that are not covered by those regulations. I don't think there's enough clarity around that in the general public for the general consumer.
I think the beautiful thing is that the organic movement isn't gone. Right? So we do have to differentiate between the label and the movement.
This is true. There is still a movement. I'm going to just accept that as a statement. There is.
Sometimes
It might be, sometimes I feel like it's a little fractured, but yes, there is. And I think we need to hold tight onto the values that are shared and to keep talking through the differences that there are in terms of things that some of us want to lift up more than others. I definitely feel like issues of equity are still a sore point. I think labor issues are still a sore point in the organic movement. There's still, I think farmers are hurting so much. I think small farmers are hurting so much that it's hard to think holistically sometimes when you are underwater financially, when you're losing your land. It's hard to think about all those labor issues and the fact that there are just scores of people, primarily Black and brown folks, that wish that they could be in that position, as tenuous as it is, but have no access to land, have no access to capital, not even, the subsidies that are being offered, even if they are a disservice to small farmers. So I think that it's hard to kind of keep that full picture in mind when you're suffering, but we have to. And I think those are the only ways that we're going to move forward this movement, as if we're really thinking about how we can build a stronger coalition by keeping everyone's rights, uplifting everyone's rights, so that there's no other way that we're going to be able to kind of face the forces that are against this movement unless we're doing it together.
Yeah, you're really speaking on the importance of really standing together and coming together. And I know so many people want and do make the right choices themselves, but how important is it that we work to build a movement together as opposed to just going out there and say, well, I make good choices?
Voting with your fork? Is that what you're getting at?
I'm saying that's important, but I'm saying we need more. I'm wondering if you agree.
Yes, I do. Voting with your fork works if you have choice. Not everyone has a choice, and that's what's missing from that idea. It's a place of privilege to be able to say, oh, I'm going to have this and not that. I have access to this and not that. The way that food apartheid works in this world is that many people don't have those choices. And many people don't have enough information, not for any lack of interest and knowledge on their own part, but just the lack of transparency in our food system. Don't have the knowledge to make those choices, right? Are desperately looking for that knowledge, but there's no transparency in that. So they can't track where it's coming from and who it's coming from and how, although they'd like to make more informed choices. So, voting with your fork works if you have, resources at your fingertips in terms of the money to make a choice, and the knowledge, infinite knowledge around what you're actually buying, which none of us really do, not the way it's working right now. So those are the two problems around this idea. The other problem is that, to your original point, it's not enough, right? Voting with your fork doesn't get at the systemic issues that undergird this entire system. It just makes small tweaks in terms of how we're operating within a system that's already broken. So what we need is to advocate for a new system. What we need is to say this one is working great for industrial agriculture as it was meant to, perfectly functioning system for folks that are already in power. It's not working for small farmers. It's not working for Black and brown folks. It's certainly not working for farm workers. It's not working for restaurant workers. In the back of the enterprise, there's so many people that this is not working for, because it was never meant to work for us. So looking at the choices that they're giving us within the system that is not meant for us is not enough. We need to look at ways that we can rebuild the system, dismantle the system, create alternatives, like real alternatives to the system, so that we don't have to make these false choices and that we can make true ones, informed ones. It's really helpful if we're able to make them by, growing our own food, I would advocate for, or cozying up to people who are growing food. These local, regional networks that we're building are a really important aspect of that. It does allow us some more transparency in the food that we eat, and it's important to bolster that. And there are other ways too. There are other ways that we can look to create alternatives to the system so that we have real choice and not these ones that, are pushed at us through the current channels of our food system.
Wow. For me, you are a huge leader. And I know for many others at Farm School NYC, you're just a really powerful voice in this movement for me. Who are some others that have affected you, and who should I go seek out in addition?
Oh my gosh, so many people. Every day I feel like I'm talking to incredible, powerful people. So, there's just my ancestors who are amazing. My own personal family line of farmers who I mentioned and lifted up at the beginning of this, like my grandma, who...
I can't watch a TED Talk by your grandma.
What?
I can't watch a TED Talk by your grandma.
Oh, you should. That is too bad, because she would have been phenomenal.
Well, you'll just have to keep telling me stories.
Well, you can't. There are a lot of people who, Ted wasn't around for, Fannie Lou Hamer, they're just dynamite. For me, obviously, I'm so inspired by Black women who have walked this path before me and so much more dire circumstances in some ways, and succeeded and just made amazing changes within their communities and within our food system in general. Changes that are still paying off, hopefully through people like me. So there's that. But of contemporary folks that are out there doing amazing work, there are so many. My own personal mentors. Definitely, I have to say Karen Washington. I will not be the only person you interview who says her name, but she has been an incredible light in my life. She, Lori Clevenger, both of those women I met very early on in this journey for me, really made space for me when I didn't know a whole lot about this movement at all, didn't know anything about farming other than what I watched my grandma do, and really showed me the way in a lot of ways, especially through our work together through Black Urban Growers and the Black Farmers Conference, which is something that I worked on very earlier on in my career. It really showed me a couple of things. One, just like the importance and power of caucus spaces for Black folks. And that wasn't my background or experience at all. I was much more indoctrinated and used to integrated spaces, and really saw the power and the need for that in terms of shifting power and building agency amongst Black folks and just organizing together. Both of them are pretty critical for me in terms of just turning me on to that and opening space and just being patient with me in my learning journeys around that, then and now, and always probably. So I want to lift up those two names for sure. I also think that Shirley Sherrod is an amazing woman and advocate and farmer and organizer. I got to meet Shirley Sherrod a few times especially when she did a keynote at NISOG when I was working there, and everything that she's done since has been so amazing and so inspiring, and I'm loving what they're currently doing in terms of building kind of collective wealth and education around the farm that they're building down south. So I think that's wonderful. I think of Savvy Horn and all the work they're doing around heirs property. I can't even start speaking and start leaving people out. Malik Yakini is doing amazing work in Detroit, where I have a lot of family, and is so inspiring. And New York can learn so much from the work that they've done there around food policy and working really around advocacy and policy on a local level. It's been dynamite. So constantly feeling like I need to sit at his feet. And so many of the folks that I'm working with here in New York State are just inspiring and exciting collaborations that we're doing now with Farm School and organizations like Northeast Farmers of Color, Lamb Trust, NEFOC with Stephanie Morningstar, who is a rock star, and I feel really honored to be able to work with. Leah Penniman at Soulfire Farm, who I'm sure you're speaking with as part of this, is so amazing and so generous with knowledge and time and platform. And Dennis Derrick from Corbin Hill Farm Project is also just an amazing mentor and person that I really look to for a lot of knowledge and experience. Olivia, I'm just going to list all the people I love.
Do it.
Olivia Watkins from Black Farmer Fund, who is half my age and twice as smart as me, and is just doing such visionary work around the Black Farmer Fund and looking at collective ways of financing with patient capital Black farm enterprises in New York State. I really could go on. So maybe I should just stop there. There's so many people.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I would?
Well, I mean, one of the questions that we had talked about before was like, what am I spending more time doing since I have so much free time now?
Yeah, right. Where are you focusing all that energy?
I did recently step off of 2 boards, and that has freed up some time for homeschooling, as all the parents are doing right now, right?
Yeah, don't get me started.
Huh?
Don't get me started. I am not a good homeschooler.
Oh my God, thank God for my husband. Oh, praises be. But yes, I have been spending a lot more time, thankfully and excitingly, as a board member of this new nonprofit called the Black Farmer Fund here in New York State. And so the real vision around the Black Farmer Fund is to build a thriving, resilient, and equitable food system that's grounded in Black food entrepreneurs who are working across all different parts of the food system. So grounded, obviously, in the foundation of our food system, which are farmers, so grounded in Black farmers in New York State, and also just looking all along the value chain at distributors, at trucking enterprises, at retailers, at looking at cooperatives and things like that, markets, restaurants, catering, value added, all of those, everything that is related to food and farming. Really looking at how we can bring blended capital. So again, looking at both grants and loans and investments, and bring that to folks that have traditionally been totally underserved by our traditional lending opportunities. So, so many of our new farmers are not really eligible for some of the products that are currently on offer by USDA, our farm credit. Some of our food entrepreneurs are so new in their space that they are not able to get kind of traditional bank loans around that, or too undercapitalized to really get that initially. How do we bridge that gap to get them in a space where they're really fully living into the vision that they have for their enterprise? So it's super exciting, not only because of the end goal and the purpose, but also the process. And so what makes us different is that this Black Farmer Fund is actually a community investment fund. So that means that it's not just, high net worth individuals that we're going to, and venture capital that we're going to get big money to put into this fund, but we're going to our community to invest in this fund, no matter how much. You could be accredited or a non-accredited investor. You could put in as little as $5, and you're within this organization helping make decisions about who we fund. And that is the game changer. So many times people are interested in investing in Black entrepreneurs and food system, things of that nature. That in and of itself is not particularly new. But what is new is who's usually making those decisions. Is it just a small board of CPAs and MBAs who are making the decision in a small room and saying this product, but not that one? Or is it a group of people who are Black farmers, are Black restaurateurs, are actually people who are doing these businesses, have lived experience in it, and can say, this is a great idea. I know this will do well. We should invest in this. Or I know the barriers this particular enterprise is going to face. And if they don't get funding for someplace like us, they're probably not going to get it anywhere else. This is a gap that we need to fill. So that's what's different about this fund. You can hear how energized I am about it. I'm super excited. We just started with a pilot program of 20 different food system entrepreneurs from throughout New York State who are coming together to build out our collective decision-making process and then actually make decisions on our first round of funding, which we hope to do in 2021. And we're hoping to do 3 to 4 deals where those Black food systems entrepreneurs who, kind of are selected will be given funding up to $50,000 for their food system business. So really excited about that. Still fundraising for it too. So definitely looking for investors to come into the fold on this. But I really think that this is what we've been missing in this field. As an educator who's working for people who have dynamite business ideas around food and farming, this is the gap. Funding, capital, startup capital is a huge part of it. And I'm so excited that we're building this new option for them.
I'm assuming people can donate land.
Well, see, that's where our partnership with NEFOC Land Trust comes in, the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And in general, we're really looking at, there are Black and BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color led organizations that we're working closely with in the Northeast and in New York State in particular to really serve our population in a more holistic way. So farm school alone, we're doing, I would say a really wonderful job. Our faculty are teaching and mentoring this new, group of folks that are coming into this space so well, helping them build up business plans, helping them with the actual technical skills. Great work. Then they graduate, and then what happens? Does farm school want to be in the position of, of a land trust? Do we need to grow in that way? We don't need to, because there are organizations that are already doing this work that we want to invest in and bring, support to do the work that they have the expertise to do. And we work in partnership with them. So for me to be able to say, after a person graduates and they have their business plan and they're ready for it, to say, okay, Black Farmer Fund is about to do a new round of funding. Let me help you get that together, your application together for that, so that you can get that funding. NEFOC just got it, as a new, roster of land that's been donated to them. Here are some options, and work with Stephanie and her team, to think that throughout the Northeast. That is how we build alternatives to the system that currently exists, so that people who are most marginalized and have not been getting these opportunities have ways in, dedicated ways in, so that they can really step into the space with power and legitimacy and voice and and that support that they so desperately need. So that's what I'm really excited about. So if you want to donate land, yes, we want to hear about it. We will, especially if it's in the Northeast, definitely we'll hook you up with Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. That is the work that they're doing, and they're doing it in such a smart way, really looking at how we're working with Native communities and indigenous communities around that land, the original stewards of that land, looking at ways that there might be kind of cultural easements around that, looking at, cooperative and collective ownership structures around land, just really turning around our traditional look and valuing of land in this country in a way that I think is much more in tune with the change we want to see in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you, Onika. You're a busy woman. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
My pleasure. This was really fun. I got to put on some lipstick and, think about things
you even painted
in a much
your
deeper
wall.
and broader way. So it's a lot of fun. And thank you for getting me out of my sweats during quarantine.
I still have them on. Here's the sweats.
Well, actually, it's too hot for sweats. It would have been something probably inappropriate. So I appreciate it. And thank you for the work that you're doing at Real Organic Project. I really am a fan. I've been following it. I believe in the work that's happening there. I believe consumers really need more information. And I believe in soil. So I'm just so happy that y'all are still out there doing this work.
I'm so lucky. It's a good job. I get to meet everybody. Thanks. Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you like what you heard today and will subscribe, tell your friends about it, and leave us a review on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you found us. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to today's conversation, can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 15. Please join us next time for an interview with Kat Taylor, a banker and philanthropist focused on deep systems change to bring social and environmental justice into our communities. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms.